They were never supposed to feel this much for you. That was never the plan. You were meant to be a passing thought, a small distraction, a brief spark they could enjoy and then forget. But that is not what happened. Somehow, without warning, you got under their skin. You stayed in their mind longer than you should have. Your voice echoed after the conversation ended. Your absence started to feel heavier than your presence ever looked on the outside. And that is where the danger began. Because the moment someone realizes you matter more than expected, they do not always move closer. Sometimes they step back. Sometimes they go quiet. Sometimes they act like nothing is happening while everything is happening underneath. Stay with me, because this is where most people misunderstand the whole story. Distance does not always mean disinterest. Silence does not always mean the feeling is gone. Sometimes silence is what happens when the feeling becomes too real to hide and too strong to control. They were not ready for a connection that could shake them this deeply. They were not ready for someone who could touch the part of them they had locked away for years, and now they are stuck with a truth they never wanted to face. You did not just catch their attention. You changed the emotional balance inside them, and once that shift begins, nothing stays casual for long. At first, you seemed safe, easy, light, something they could handle. You were supposed to be temporary, like a song that sounds good for one night and disappears by morning. But slowly, so slowly they barely noticed it, that changed. Your words started staying with them. Your energy followed them into quiet moments. Your absence started creating a strange weight they could not explain. That is when the fear began. Not because they felt nothing, but because they felt too much. You woke up something old inside them. Not just attraction, not just affection. Something deeper, something buried. Something they had spent years trying to live without. And once it woke up, it did not ask permission. It just moved in. It crossed past logic. It slipped around the defenses they built to protect their identity. That is the part that unsettled them most. They did not choose this in a clear, controlled way. It happened below thought, below reason, in that hidden place where emotions form before the mind can explain them. Real feelings often begin there, quietly, suddenly, without asking if the timing is right. And when that kind of feeling shows up, the ego gets nervous. It starts shouting, "This is too much. This is too fast. This is too risky." So they tried to pull back, not because they did not want you, but because wanting you felt like losing control over themselves. And for some people, control has always felt safer than love. So they created space, just enough to breathe, just enough to feel protected. But the strange part was this. The more they tried to calm the feeling down, the more intense it became. Because buried emotion does not die. It changes shape. It grows in silence. It gets stronger in the dark. And now you were no longer just someone they liked. You became someone they could not push out of their system, especially when you were gone. Maybe even more when you were gone. Because your absence removed the distraction. No message, no voice, no moment to soften the impact. Just silence. And in silence, the truth becomes louder. That is why their behavior started looking confusing from the outside. Hot, then cold, close, then distant, interested, then suddenly unavailable. It made no sense if you were only watching the surface. But under the surface, it made perfect sense. Nothing changed. It simply became real. And reality is harder to manage than fantasy. When it was undefined, they felt in charge. When it was light, they felt safe. But once the feeling gained weight, once it started carrying consequences, once it became something that could change them, fear stepped in. And fear is clever. It does not always scream. Sometimes it sounds reasonable. Sometimes it dresses itself as logic. Sometimes it whispers, "Take a step back, think clearly, do not get carried away." But what it is really saying is this: do not let yourself be touched this deeply again. Even they could feel something was shifting inside. They could sense that this was not ordinary. This was not the kind of bond you casually walk away from and forget next week. Part of them knew, even if they could not fully say it, that if they let this grow, it would change them for good. Not in a small way, not in a neat and comfortable way, in a lasting way. And that is where the true conflict started. Because now this was no longer just about emotion. It was about identity, about the version of themselves they had built over time. The controlled one, the guarded one, the one who survives by staying careful. And now there was you, carrying something unpredictable, something alive, something impossible to keep in a box. So the question inside them changed. It was no longer, do I like this person? It became, What happens to me if I do not let this go? And that question is dangerous because deep down, the answer is already there. They knew this feeling had gone too far to call it casual. They knew distance was not killing it. If anything, distance sharpened it. Because once you were gone, all that remained was what you had awakened in them. Needs they had hidden under independence. Softness they had covered with pride. Longing they had renamed as strength. And now every one of those hidden pieces was awake, asking to be seen. That is why they got restless. That is why they looked unsettled. That is why normal life started feeling thinner than before. Here is the part they would almost never say out loud. Losing you felt scary. Yes, but facing themselves felt even scarier. Because you became a mirror. You reflected back truths they had spent years avoiding. That they need more than they admit. That they want deeper connection than they pretend. That they are not as untouched, as self-contained, or as invulnerable as they tried to believe. And once someone sees that truth in themselves, they cannot fully unsee it. So what do? They start building stories. This is too complicated. This will not work. This is not realistic. This is bad timing. But those thoughts are not always the truth. A lot of the time, they are defense, simple defense, because logic becomes a shield when the heart starts moving faster than the mind can handle. And that only made the contradiction worse. Outwardly, they acted like they were creating distance. Inwardly, they were holding on tighter. They replayed your words, your face, the feeling of being seen by you, without pressure, without games, without force. That part hit hardest, because you did not chase. You did not try to trap them. You just showed up in a way that felt real. And real is rare, almost painfully rare. So rare that some people mistake it for danger the moment they feel it. Watch this closely, because this is where the pattern turns. The same person who feels most drawn to what is real may also be the one most afraid to trust it. Not because it is wrong, but because it has the power to undo all the walls they worked so hard to build. That is why they started splitting you in their mind. One part of them saw you as everything they had been missing. The other part saw you as a threat to the emotional structure they had built to stay safe. Those two views could not live peacefully together, so they bounced between them. One day they moved closer. The next day they backed away. One moment they felt sure. The next moment fear caught up and made them doubt everything. Their feelings did not disappear. Their fear just became louder. And fear can sound convincing. It can make running away look like wisdom. It can make detachment look like strength. It can make self-protection look noble. But the truth underneath was harder to escape. You were no longer just a person in their life. You had become a disruption to the story they told themselves about who they are. You made them question things they never wanted to question. Why did this hit me so hard? Why can't I move on? Why does this feel like something I should not lose, but still cannot fully accept? Those are not easy questions. And the answers demand something most people avoid for years. Vulnerability, surrender, emotional honesty. That is why they kept analyzing, instead of allowing. They kept trying to contain what was never meant to be contained. But suppressed feelings do not stay neatly hidden. They leak into mood, into energy, into empty moments that suddenly feel heavier for no clear reason. And what looked like confusion from the outside was often conflict from the inside. They were not unsure of the feeling. They were terrified of what the feeling would require. Because loving you was never just about having someone. In their mind, loving you meant change. It meant risk. It meant stepping outside old emotional habits that had protected them, even if those same habits had also kept them lonely. That was the real choice in front of them. Stay safe, or feel something real. Hold control, or let life touch you in a way that might reshape you. And most people, when forced into that choice too quickly, do not choose truth. They choose what feels familiar, even if familiar is empty, even if familiar turns into regret later. Deep down, they could feel that possibility growing. That quiet thought that maybe walking away would not bring peace. Maybe it would bring something worse. Maybe it would leave behind a question that never stops echoing. What if this was the one feeling I was not supposed to throw away? That thought visits late at night, in silence, in those moments when distractions stop working and the mind has nowhere left to hide. They tried to bury it. They tried to stay busy. They told themselves this would fade with time. But time does not erase every connection. Some connections do not fade. They settle. They sink deeper. They become part of your inner structure. That is what made this so hard to escape. You were tied to something inside them now. Something specific. Something that did not transfer easily. And once a person feels that, ordinary replacements stop working. Other people may seem kind, attractive, available, even good. But good is not always enough when someone has already felt something unforgettable. That is why other connections started feeling thinner. Not because nobody else had value, but because nobody else opened the same door in them. That difference matters. It is not always about comparison. It is about recognition. You activated a part of them that had been asleep so long they forgot it existed, and now everything else felt like a weaker version of something they could not recreate. That trapped them in a strange inner loop. They were trying to forget someone who had changed the way they felt their own life, and you cannot simply erase the person who shifted your inner world. You can deny it, you can cover it, you can distract yourself from it, but you cannot make it unhappen. So they filled their days with noise, work, people, tasks, scrolling, conversation, anything that would keep the silence away. Because silence was dangerous now. Silence brought back memory, all at once, your energy, your words, the unfinished emotional space between what was felt and what was said. And this is where the pain deepened. Before you, they knew how to manage themselves. They had systems, boundaries, distance, patterns that kept everything neat and safe. But you broke through that system, without trying. You made them feel first, and understand later. You reached them before they could prepare, and now their old defenses were no longer working the same way. That is terrifying for someone who built their whole life around staying guarded, because it means they are exposed, not only to you, but to everything within themselves they spent years trying not to feel. When someone keeps pushing down what is real, it does not vanish. It starts showing up sideways, in irritation, with no clear cause, in restless nights, in a strange dissatisfaction that follows them even when life looks fine on the outside, because something is missing, something they refuse to name, but keep feeling anyway. And this is where the emotional cost begins to turn into real consequence. Now it is not only about missing you, it is about what missing you revealed, the gap, the hunger, the emotional depth they were capable of but had denied for so long. Once that awareness arrives, it stays. You either face it or you keep carrying it. They chose to carry it. But carrying it came with weight. Every time they pushed the feeling down, it rose again, stronger, more intrusive, more painful. Slowly, what started as avoidance became regret. Not loud regret, not dramatic regret, quiet regret. The kind that grows in the background while a person pretends everything is normal, because then another question appears, and this one is even harder to live with. What if I walked away from something real? What if I let fear make the choice? What if I did not lose you because it was wrong, but because I was not ready? That question does not leave easily. It repeats. It deepens. It follows them into ordinary moments until ordinary moments stop feeling ordinary at all. Stay with this, because this is the turning point. Once regret mixes with love, the feeling becomes heavier than either one alone. It is no longer just longing. It becomes psychological weight, a permanent unfinished sentence living in the back of the mind. And over time, the illusion starts breaking apart. The illusion that this was temporary, the illusion that it was replaceable, the illusion that moving on would return everything to normal. Normal does not come back that easily after a connection like this. They begin noticing it in small moments first. A conversation that should feel engaging, but doesn't. A laugh that does not reach as deep as it used to. A room full of people that still feels empty. And then the deeper truth lands. It is not only that they miss you, they miss who they were when they were open with you. They miss the version of themselves that felt alive, connected, and emotionally awake. That part hurts in a different way, because now losing you does not feel like losing only a person. It feels like losing access to a part of themselves, a better part, a softer part, a more honest part. And once they realize that, the pressure becomes almost unbearable. The question changes again. It is no longer, do I miss them? It becomes, what part of me did I abandon when I walked away? That is the kind of question that cracks the whole identity open, because the answer points inward, to fear, to avoidance, to all the defenses that were supposed to protect them, but ended up costing them something rare. Now they cannot fully believe the old story anymore. The story that this was not that deep. The story that walking away was the wise choice. The story that they would be completely fine. Something inside them knows they are not fine, not in the way they expected. And that knowing keeps building until there is nowhere left to hide from it. Eventually, resistance stops feeling like control and starts feeling like loss, quiet loss, private loss. The kind that slips into everything without permission. It shows up in conversations that feel unfinished, in moments that should feel full but somehow fall short, in the strange ache that appears when life is calm and there is finally space to feel what was avoided. And then the hardest truth begins to rise. They did not protect themselves. They walked away from something real. That is a brutal realization, because it strips every excuse down to the bone. No more pretending it was small. No more acting like you were just a passing chapter. If that were true, you would not still be there in their thoughts, in their emotional memory, in the shape of the standards they now carry into every future connection. Because that is what a deep bond does when it is not fully lived. It becomes a reference point, a quiet measure, a psychological imprint. Every real connection after this will be compared to what they felt with you, whether they admit it or not. And that comparison will not always be fair, but it will always exist. That is why this story does not end when distance begins. Sometimes distance makes it sharper. Sometimes only after losing something do people finally see what it was. And that is the cruel part. Clarity often arrives after the chance to act has already passed. If this is hitting hard, keep listening, because the next truth is the one they tried hardest not to face. They did not lose you because you were not enough. They lost you because they were still trying to be someone who needed less than they actually did. Now they are left with a reality they never expected. A life where they finally understand the depth of what they felt, but cannot return to the exact moment where it could have unfolded differently. That is what makes it sting so deeply. It is not just missing you, it is realizing what you represented. You were not pressure. You were not manipulation. You were not a game. You were something real, offered in a world full of performance. And because it was real, it was powerful. Because it was powerful, it scared them. Because it scared them, they turned away. But turning away did not erase the truth. It only delayed it. And delayed truth can become its own kind of torment. Because clarity without action is painful. It is knowing exactly what something meant when there is no clean way to go back and honor it. It is understanding the value only after choosing fear over presence. That kind of understanding does not disappear. It becomes part of the person. It changes how they love later. It makes them more careful, yes, but also more haunted, more aware of how easily something rare can be missed, more aware of how expensive self-protection can become when it is used against the very thing the heart has been asking for all along. That is the lasting consequence, not just that they loved you, but that they loved you, knew it too late, and have to carry the knowledge forward. Some wounds scream. This one does not. This one follows quietly, day after day, choice after choice, connection after connection, and the silence of it makes it even harder to escape. So here is the final truth, stripped down to its rawest form. They never planned to love you like this. They did not mean for you to matter this much. They did not expect your presence to shift their inner world, expose their hidden needs, or wake up the parts of them they had buried to survive. But it happened. It happened anyway, and when it became undeniable, they chose distance over honesty, control over surrender, fear over truth. That choice did not save them. It only separated them from something they may never fully replace. Now they live with the consequence, not always loudly, not always visibly, but deeply, in the spaces where memory returns, in the moments when life feels slightly dimmer than it should, in the sudden awareness that what they let go of was not casual, not ordinary, not easy to find again. And maybe that is the hardest part of all. They can understand it now. They can see the whole shape of it now. They can admit, at least to themselves, that what they felt was rare and real and far deeper than they were ready to handle. But understanding after the fact does not reopen the same door. Time moves, chances close, some invitations do not return in the same form twice. And that is the weight they carry now. Not just that they loved you, but that they loved you and still let fear make the choice. If they ever seem calm, remember this: calm does not always mean peace. Sometimes it means the storm moved inward. Sometimes it means the truth arrived late and never left. And sometimes the heaviest thing a person carries is not heartbreak itself, but the unbearable knowledge that they were loved by something real, and they were not ready when it came.